I think we are live. So welcome everyone to another edition of Subvisual Live Talks. As you know, just please follow us or on any of these channels down here. That should give you all the information that you need to know about Subvisual Live Talks. And now, without further ado, because we're already a couple of minutes late, I would like to introduce Bryant. Bryant, hi.
Hi, nice to meet you, and hello, everyone.
Hey, cool. Yeah, so Brian, I know you're not super familiar with the format, but basically what we do here at Savage Live Talks is we talk about your experience in tech and how you came to where you are right now and kind of the path in between. Um, so the first question I would like to ask you is what drew you to tech? Like what was the first driver and how young were you?
So I suppose I'm pretty different than a lot of people that work in tech now because I was born in Silicon Valley. Both my parents worked in Silicon Valley. My dad at Hewlett Packard for over 15 years. My mom worked at Novell, Tipco, and had a long Silicon Valley career as well. So, just growing up as a very, very young kid, I hang out at my dad's office in HP, and uh, he was actually playing Tetris. Like, I don't even think I ever saw him working. So, I've always been, in and around Silicon Valley my whole life. So I've, from a very early age, had a very good appreciation for what some of the big figureheads in Silicon Valley were, and starting companies out of garages, seeing Apple's campus explode in my backyard. I grew up in the town that was right next to Cupertino, California,
Mm-hmm.
and having a lot of friends whose moms and dads also worked in Silicon Valley. So I don't know, it was just kind of like always in my DNA. And I suppose when I was applying to schools, I kind of like backed into engineering as opposed to me seeking out engineering disciplines. So I was never very good at English. I hated reading, but I was pretty decent at, like mathematics,
Mm-hmm.
physics. So I was just like, all right, well, I'm just going to go and study to be an engineer. And I picked computer engineering. Simply because I played video games as a kid. I built my own computers. I would solder my own batteries for my RC cars. I would build my own power supplies. I would uh, inhale a lot of smoke from soldering batteries as well. So I think that probably impacted my decision making. So I went to UC San Diego, which had a really good computer engineering program, and studied engineering, and I guess that was that.
Cool. It's interesting to me that you mentioned you had that experience from your parents, and well, first of all, that you didn't want to go to computer science necessarily, and also that you're talking a lot about what could be like mechanical engineering or electric engineering. So
Yeah,
what was the drive to actual like computer science?
so it's actually really interesting because in high school I took AP computer science, and that was my first exposure to computer programming. And honestly speaking, it was really, really hard. Like I just like couldn't do very simple things like write a for loop or make a function call. Like those things were just like, whoa, this is like very different than playing a computer game. So a lot of those concepts took a really long time for me to grasp. And even while I was in high school, like I wouldn't necessarily say like I really enjoyed programming. So I think that's what steered me clear of computer science. Once I got to university, I was just like, oh well, like I know how circuits work. I know how electrons move. So I'm going to stick to more like the double E electrical engineering side. But then it was only after I took a programming course in college that I was like, oh, this is actually pretty interesting. This is actually pretty fun, which got me more interested in computer science.
Cool. So what kind of programming languages did you get started with? Do you
Oh
remember?
man. Well, I started with Turbo Pascal, and then started writing Java,
Right.
and then that was in high school. And then the first language that we used once I got to university was C. And then very quickly, assembly language, I believe it was RISC.
Mm-hmm.
And then very quickly after that, C++, um, OCaml after that, and then a lot of the functional languages. Those ones I really struggle with, and frankly, like functional languages are still quite obtuse to me and esoteric compared to the more empirical ones. So I definitely have been exposed to a lot of different things, all the way from Verilog to OCaml to C++, and obviously higher order languages now like JavaScript that are much easier to write. So it's been fun because my journey as a computer scientist, so to speak, uh, isn't very successful unless I'm to look at like the actual companies that I helped build on the technical side.
Mm-hmm.
So Bungle, my first company, having very little experience in JavaScript specifically, I decided to build all of the backend in Node. And this is when Node was version 0.4, so back in 2011, very early. But I just had a
Why
feeling.
was that? Yeah, I was gonna ask why did you go with Node?
Well, first of all, I came from Intuit, and Intuit was heavy Java, J2EE, um, literally to do something extremely simple, like handle a web request. You had to literally touch 15 files, write interfaces, abstract classes, extend objects. And it was just like that very heavy OOP just was not something that I felt was very productive, especially when you're trying to go from 0 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
Like Intuit was operating at obviously a much larger scale where they had literally hundreds of millions of customers that relied on the web stack. And that just requires a very different software engineering methodology, right? So you want to make sure that you're writing your classes, extending these interfaces, and these interfaces have been defined by these like architects and everything, and like the engineers are really just like plug and play. But when you're a CTO of a very small startup, like what you're trying to do is just like make things as simple as possible. So that's what made me choose Node. In one, like literally the web server was one file,
Mm-hmm.
and then like from there you start to split it up, as opposed to thinking about, oh, this is my NetBeans and this is
Right.
my Apache Tomcat container, and then I have to make sure my jar files are copied, and I got my Maven XML files for my build. It was just like, this is just
Simpler.
not how I want to do it.
Yeah. But also interesting because I think I was looking up like the timeline, and that was what, like 07, 08 maybe.
Yeah, that was 07, 08,
So
09, and then I
so that
left in
that was also, I think, around the time that Rails was kind of like exploding,
Yep.
particularly like in the US. Do you remember like making a decision between like not going with Rails and do you remember why that was?
Yes, I had a. So what I did was I simply benchmarked a bunch of different frameworks on my own. So I had Rails, I had Django, and I had Node, and I had a very specific technical requirement that I was looking to solve for. And back in the Bungle days, it was essentially I was building an ad server from scratch. So I needed very high web throughput. I needed very high database writes and reads. So I wrote a very, very simple benchmark. No, I don't even think I used a benchmark. I just used Apache Bench.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote very simple web servers with one route that would simply just accept the request
Mm-hmm.
and write that document to Mongo or write that document to Postgres.
Mm-hmm.
So I had essentially 9 different variations from Django, Rails, and Node, and I had 3. So I had 3 different programming frameworks, and then I had 3 different databases: Postgres, MySQL, and Mongo. And because I knew I was like solving a very specific technical requirement, which is throughput, I simply just benchmarked. So then at the end of the benchmark, Node and Mongo was 10 times faster than Rails and anything else. So it was a very easy decision for me. It was just like, well, I remember how difficult it was to shard MySQL or Postgres databases. I remember how difficult it was to horizontally scale those databases. So knowing exactly what, and I essentially did a model. I knew how large the database would be given certain circumstances. I was saying like, okay, well, MongoDB, back then Mongo was version 1.8. Like, this is going to take us this far. And to be honest with you, I think Bungle, which is processing probably, on the order of like 10 billion API calls a day, I think they're still using that stack. They're still using a node stack. They're still using Mongo for a lot of core things. Of course, they've since added a lot of different data stores, but up to the point that Bungle was acquired for close to $900 million last year, like I believe a lot of like foundational technology is still
Mm-hmm.
pretty much the same.
Cool. And so when you say node, I'm assuming at that time that you were building your own server, was Express already around or anything like that?
The TJ Wolchuk just came
Mm-hmm.
out with Express, and you know, as a lot of people know, it's very similar to Sinatra framework and
Mm-hmm.
Rails. So it's what I use.
Cool. No, I was just wondering if you had used a framework out of the box, or if you had to build your own.
No, I didn't have to build my own by then. Node already had an ecosystem. It wasn't a very large ecosystem, but on npm, I think there was already like 1,000 modules, and then one of them, there were probably like 2 web frameworks in there. So
Cool. Yeah. So as you're mentioning that was with Vungle, and then you moved on from that directly to Webflow, or was cool.
yep.
And Webflow, I believe, is also built on Node. So you'd like that decision?
Yeah, obviously Node's not perfect, but Node's gotten significantly better just due to the fact that V8 is something that Google and the Chromium, well, I think it's just Google, invest heavily in. So I think the performance in terms of like handling web requests and like the actual JavaScript runtime has like improved 10x from just like 4 years ago, and it's only going to get better. Um, the thing with Node that I feel like I regret to a certain degree is the matter of types. And coming from my Java days, coming from my .NET days, that was just something that I really, really missed. Like you'd be able to command click on a function, you could immediately jump to it. You'd be able to refactor things a lot faster. I remember in Visual Studio, you could simply just like double click on a function, and then I had all these shortcuts set up where you can just rename and like instantly refactor that function
Mm-hmm.
because it was a typed language, and you can do those sort of things. But now, like what we're sort of struggling with now with our massive code base, and I think there's like 1.2 million lines of significant lines of code now in Webflow. You can't do those things anymore when you're using untyped languages, just in vanilla JavaScript. So that's one thing that we really struggle with. But so far, we're not considering like migrating anything at least with the core backend code base to any other language. We obviously pick and choose certain things, like so some instances we have Go, some instances actually, yeah, Go is the only other like language that we use on the back end.
Do you have, or do you consider you have like microservice architecture, or is it like a node server that's handling everything?
So we definitely have like different parts of our backend code base. We have a mono repo at the moment. It's worked out really well for us. It's simplified a lot of the deployment, but obviously now we're at a point where Webflow is getting so big that we have to think about, how do we make it modular? How do we establish code boundaries? We use a lot of serverless as well. So AWS Lambda is powering a lot of the Webflow service. It gives us the ability to just really scale endlessly for certain compute tasks. So for things like that, we leverage the advancements and the innovations in the cloud to help us do what we need to do. And then for critical things where from a developer productivity standpoint, and then also from a CI/CD standpoint, we just build on top of the mono repo because all the context is there. We don't have to worry about like daisy chaining deployments and things like that. It makes things, it's simple, but it's still obviously complex.
Yeah, no, I think it just not having to manage versions of different things. It's just way easier. Um, yeah. So one thing I'm pretty sure like everyone that's listening knows what Webflow is, but do you want to give a quick overview of how you see it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have my normal pitch, but given that this audience, I'm guessing, is more technical,
Mm-hmm.
um, what we really are underneath the hood is a completely new way of publishing and building websites, and soon web applications. So what Webflow is a visual abstraction over the underlying technology that makes a website what it is. So we have we have a design tool that abstracts away a lot, I can't say all, of the most important CSS properties. We have a drag and drop interface that uses the browser's box model and layouts where you can drag elements onto the page. And the reason why we built this product was we really wanted to marry design and development into the same interface, into the same tool. Um, we believe designers, developers alike can start to have a lot more interactive experience when building a website. That's why someone can build a completely bespoke website that's got responsive images, that is published behind an SSL certificate, that has dynamic content, really in a day or less than a day in some cases. And we feel like that's a product that a lot of companies, a lot of individuals can benefit from. And I think from a lens of a developer, the common question that we get is like, well, how would Webflow compare to like the Jamstack? Well, the Jamstack is great. It gives you a lot of customizability, but in a lot of instances, you don't really need all that customizability. For example, like how often do you actually care about the fact that it's React behind the scenes? How often do you actually care about the fact that your users um, are seeing components or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
So for us, we very much care about things like components. We very much care about modularization. We care about style guides, but we're essentially stripping it down to the bare necessities. So we were thinking about, it was like, all right, this is just an HTML element. These are element styling, and let's just expose that interface to our users. So I would say that the vast majority of companies and vast majority of websites out there don't necessarily need the complexity of a Jamstack, right? Where you have to handle the deployment engine, you have to handle all these like scripts to help you deploy your website. Where Webflow, you open up the designer, it's a blank canvas, you build whatever you want, and then you could just publish in one click.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for a lot of use cases, for a lot of digital teams, a lot of agencies, a lot of companies out there, it's the preferred approach and something that we've seen a lot of interest.
Yeah, for sure. No, I would agree there. Like I see, especially on websites, as you were saying, that it's just a lot of time and complexity, and just wasted on building something that like you won't really need just to show a web page, like a web page like that. But you touched there that you're now looking into web apps. So how does that transition? Because now in web apps, obviously you have probably a lot of more custom backend, like different interactions with APIs, databases, all that kind of stuff. So different challenges probably, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we're taking a very similar approach, extracting like the raw technological elements that make a web application, and we're exposing that to a visual interface. So without like giving away too much, or without like sharing things that we haven't already shared,
Mm-hmm.
it's precisely actually what you just said, which is how do we interface with APIs? What does that custom data layer look like? What are some of like the actions or triggers that would produce some type of computation event?
Okay.
And how do you take the outputs of that computation event and do something with
Mm-hmm.
it? Whether it's book a hotel room, add a row to your Airtable database, add a row to a Google Sheet, whatever it might be. So, that's really just an extension of how we want to bring visual development into the world. And that's something that we care a lot about, which is you have software development through handwritten code, and you have visual development of that software. And we believe visual software should be a thing. We believe that not just developers or not just designers should be capitalizing on the fact that you can write software visually, but developers can too. And visual development's been around for decades, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of companies out there that, in the 80s, for example, there's a French aviation company where instead of like handwriting how autopilot works on Airbus, A330s, that software is actually designed visually, and they provide visual developers a set of tools to handle logic branches to trigger different events inside the avionics system. So if it exists for designing aircraft flight software, how come that software doesn't exist for the vast majority of software applications that are being built, which is the Ruby type of applications, the Rails type of applications, the React apps, and the web apps that we're building every day.
No, yeah, I believe that like the 80s, as you were saying, there were a lot more, there was a lot of research put into visual building applications. I believe Brett Victor writes a lot about that. Uh, but a question there, like what kind of pushback do you get from developers? Because I assume you get pushback from developers in like, because you're basically presenting a new-ish, at least, way of looking at implementing web apps.
Yeah, it's funny you asked that because I actually remember when I went over to Braga and spoke at the conference that Subvisual
MirrorConf, yeah.
put on. Yeah, MirrorConf. A lot of skeptical developers came up to us and they're just like, well, like it's actually not that big of a delta
Hmm.
between what Webflow does and what I can do. That is true. It's not that big of a delta. But I think the thing that not a lot of developers realize is that there's a lot of digital professionals out there that can't do what developers want to do. So in those circumstances, like Webflow really wants to provide a service that can actually, empower that audience, and then also figure out how to create an ecosystem where developers can contribute to that. So developers are extremely important to Webflow. We really want to make sure that we can build a product where they feel included. And a lot of the things that are in the product today, such as custom code, embeds, etc., really make it possible for developers to coexist alongside designers. Because at the end of the day, we're really thinking about what is the best experience we can provide our customers, what is the desired business outcome, and the path that we get there could be far and wide, but I think if we can agree on like we want to build the best products, we want to make sure the UX is the most seamless, like let's just get it out there for the benefits of the business. Like we agree on some of those foundational principles, then developers can't really argue against that. Developers want the same thing. So it's really about, it's like, hey, it's not like either or, it's yes and.
Cool. Great. So changing subjects slightly. So I noticed from the path you're saying, okay, you were at Intuit, but then with Vungle and Webflow, I don't know if you were part of the founding team or just joined early on. But so what made you want to like start your own companies or just be in this kind of startup world versus the larger corporations?
Because I didn't really, I have like, it's very difficult for me to work in an environment where I feel like it could be better than how things are going right now, or what we're doing, or like the strategy, when I'm not empowered to affect that change. So I kind of just like worked myself into being a person that, is more or less, for lack of a better word, like, in the brain trust of the company, where I can affect the change in a way that is highest impact. And I don't know, it's never something where I like woke up, as a kid and just like, yeah, I'm going to go be an entrepreneur. That was never something I ever thought about. It was just more so like the process of elimination. And then me just frankly being very comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity that I think has led me to being a founder at, two startups now.
Yeah. No, that I think that you touched the point that's really important there, the uncertainty. I think a lot of people want to be entrepreneurs and are not comfortable with just guesswork at times. So that's important. And in that sense of like building a company, building a digital product, I was wondering what your opinion is on like the first version of a product, because you hear and like there's this saying of if you're not ashamed of the first version, you launch too late, right? And how true do you think that still is in the like nowadays?
I don't think that adage applies anymore. I'm going to be honest with you and say that like MVPs um, are very, very different than MMPs, minimal marketable products. I believe in minimal marketable products because I think in this day and age, your brand, which consists of the customer's ability to trust your brand, I think that's almost just as important as like what your product does. So if you're gonna go and ship like a product that you're ashamed of, and I'm gonna guess like you're probably not someone that has like the product eye as someone like a Steve Jobs. You're just like a regular product person that's probably already not going to meet the bar for the vast majority of very discerning customers that are out there. So, we've gone away from MVPs here at Webflow, and we started talking more about MMPs because it's really about how that product is received, combined with the brand, combined with the marketing message, because that's ultimately what's going to make the product successful. Because I think just with the sheer amount of web apps and products that are out there, you're not going to really be able to find product market fit unless you have like some insane technological breakthrough like GPT or something like that, where people are going to live with something that's like shoddy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I at least view it.
And then how do you balance the investment that is coming up with okay, this product needs to be at a certain like higher bar, uh, like versus the other option, which would be like, okay, let's do a first version that's not as good. Uh, does that, both in terms of investment, in terms of money, but also in terms of the learning, like how do you embed learning into that process? Because I'm assuming even in building Webflow and Vongo, like you were learning as you were building, like with beta testers, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, it totally depends on the. So I always talk about like the product context, the business context, and the market context. Like you have to make sure that you're aware of all of these things at any given time when you're trying to do something with your product or company. So if you're like a brand new company, you have to be thinking like, all right, well, I've got, let's say you're like a travel app or something that like, is one in a million. Like you have to literally build like the incredible product experience with incredible design, and you have to offer value that other apps aren't delivering. In which case, you have to go on the extreme end of you have to make sure every pixel, every interaction, every animation is perfect. On the flip side, if you are literally building an ad server or like an industrial machine like interface where there's like an n of one in terms of like an end user, you don't care about any of those things, right? So like if you're like aware of the context that you're in, that way you can divert your resources and your energy to the right places. And I think it's just about making those trade-offs, but just being very much aware of what those trade-offs are and when you have to invest in this versus that.
Cool. Yeah, the reason I was asking is because at Subvisual, obviously, we help a lot of startups, and this is something that like is a contention point all the time, is like when to launch, and like also like what do you want to launch, and I think it goes to what you were saying. Okay, there's these different pillars, and all these things you need to be aware of, and you mentioned there like that your brand right now is very important nowadays, which I agree, but do you think that's something that you need to build even before you have a product? Is something like, how do you go about like building your brand?
There's certain companies that do like index on that. For example, I remember there's a company based out of Berlin called Pitch. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they index really heavily on their brand design, where they generated a lot of buzz just based off of their design. And I feel like they pioneered this very like what's now in vogue, like 3D kind of cartoonish design on their website. And that helped a lot with their brand because like the designer tech community was like, oh wow, this is really cool. That means their product must be. So sometimes companies use their brand design as a way to like break out and to get signal and to get awareness of their product before the actual launch. So that's something that people do. Um, and another thing that people do is simply uh, try to generate hype through just like very unconventional ways. So at least with the example at Webflow, we built like this proof of concept product, and you can actually still see it. It's live. It's on playground.webflow.com. And this proof of concept demo actually gave users the ability to kind of experience what Webflow would be like if we were an actual product. And that kind of went viral on Twitter. We had like a sign up list where if you started referring people, it would move your list up to the top. And that gave us a lot of awareness. So I think we had 20,000 people on our sign up list before we were even live. So I think people nowadays have to just be more creative. It's not just like, hey, let's build a landing page and throw it on Product Hunt and see how it does. That's really just not going to
Mhm.
do that much unless you have like something really game changing.
Yeah, no, yeah, that like trying mysterious route where you're saying like I'm gonna launch something, it's gonna be great. Um, like a lot of companies are doing that nowadays. We saw that like maybe Superhuman was doing that. Like we're gonna revolutionize email, and you had to sign up, and that's a great way to get people in the door. Uh, but one thing that's curious for me, so Webflow, I believe you guys mentioned, well, at least somewhere, that you're part of the no code movement or something like that. Uh, is that a buzzword that you're trying to go with, or?
Yeah, I think the no code space specifically is a very new and exciting space. Um, I don't think it's something that Webflow wants to say, like, we are the biggest or best no code company. I think no code is more talked about right now internally as like a movement,
Mhm.
just in the same way that like mobile was a
Mhm.
movement or social was a movement. So it would be like, I think, kind of silly for Webflow to say, like, yeah, we're the number one no code company when it's really just like the broader theme of the technology era that we're in. So what we wanted to do was we really wanted to at least help this narrative kind of pick up more steam. And that's why we held our first no code conference about a year ago. That's why we're going to do like a virtual no code conference in the near future, because I think the excitement around it is definitely pretty palatable, and I think it's something that the world needs and speaks directly to what the mission of the company is. So I think it is something that is exciting, but it's definitely very amorphous, and it's not something that anyone can say like, yeah, this is exactly what the no code movement
Yeah,
is.
I was gonna.
But it's
I'm
just
sorry. I was gonna ask like if you could define what no code is. But maybe you're saying that you don't really have a good definition for it.
well, my take is that the no code movement is more so speaking to this era of what software companies are doing, certain software companies are doing in this day and age. So software in general is just like you're taking previously manual tasks or suboptimal tasks and you're just making it easier, right? That's like essentially like the definition of software. So instead of writing OpenGL code to animate your next movie, you have products like Maya, you have products like 3D Studio Max or whatever to essentially automate that handwritten GL code for you. And fast forward, let's to where we are today. Airtable. Airtable is a smart spreadsheet that makes it a lot easier for you to do things that you could still do in Excel, but you probably need to write some Visual Basic. You probably need to connect to your Power BI connector or whatever. So I think um, no code for this era of software companies is, I think, the right moniker for what software companies are trying to do in this space, because what we're trying to do at Webflow, what Zapier is trying to do, what Airtable is trying to do, is trying to take what you could do with software today, but the next evolution of it is that you don't have to write API connectors. You don't have to write Visual Basic Excel macros. You don't have to write raw HTML and CSS. So that's like the definition of no code for me, which is you're already building on top of software, which is already automating all this, but you're just making it that much easier.
Right. So it's kind of a no code for you. Like someone has to write that code, right? It's just you don't have to write that code.
No code for you. Yeah.
Um, cool. No, that makes sense. And one thing that I had here is because in a lot of these movements, like you see a lot of overhyping, a lot of people just joining the bandwagon, and but it seems that what you're saying is just okay. Like this is probably gonna be something that's gonna even grow more in the next few years, maybe decades. But there's space for other things as well. I think that's kind of what you were saying.
So I think the most audacious interpretation of no code is that these companies at some point in the future is going to not own, because it's a bad word, but it's going to empower the next layer of computing. So, at least in terms of how we're thinking about things at Webflow, it's how do we actually create these layers on top of the existing technology to make those layers a lot more functional and usable. Those layers are how do you build a bespoke website without coding? Those layers are how do you build a dynamic database without installing or using like actual raw databases and writing queries. Those are the things that I think naturally abstract those things, where if you're building a web site or a web application, let's say 5 years from now, you won't even know what Lambda is. You won't even know what document data stores are. You won't even know what a high availability disaster recovery tools or processes look like, because you're using companies like Webflow to handle all of that, where you get that out of the box. So that's at least our vision of the future, where it's not just like what software you can build, but it's how you're running that software, and it's like the maintenance overhead, etc.
So you mentioned Lambda there a couple of times already, because it's obviously a big building block for the no code movement. Do you think, I don't know if there's already alternatives, but do you think there's going to be like realistic alternatives for AWS Lambda, or do you think the future we'll be calling it AWS instead of internet because everything just runs there?
No, I think there's like something like 215 services that AWS has. I think like Lambda is not going to go away. What I'm trying to say is that for the next generation of software professionals, they might not need to know. They might not need to care. Um, there will be things that will make interfacing with serverless frameworks and compute layers, whether it's Azure functions or cloud functions on GCP or Lambdas on AWS, it would just make it a lot more approachable. So I think that's one of the things that we feel like would probably be the case. Yeah.
Cool. So another question about Webflow, but more on the product side. So I'm always interested in learning how companies do product, basically. So from you have a new idea for a feature or something, or like a request comes from a user or whatever. But how does then that get integrated into the process, and how does it eventually reach the Webflow production platform?
Yeah. We definitely listen to our customers, but we really want to make sure we're listening to the right ones.
Right.
Um, and then on top of that, we also have just like a wide variety of things that we want to build that our customers don't even know is capable of building. Like, so we have to strike the right balance between listening to the customers in terms of what they want today and building futuristic things that they don't even know that they want, but they would have incredible value in using. So we have a wish list. It's somewhere where you can go and cast wishes for votes for what you would like to see. We have a very large backlog of things that we can build. And then we have like a global product roadmap where it's like, hey, here are some like really critical things that we'd like to add to a list of capabilities in Webflow that we want to work on. Some of them are obvious, some of them are not. So we just honestly just are trying to figure out what is the right process. And our new VP of product is working very closely with the founders to try to develop what the right sequencing is, what the right story is that we're looking to tell,
Yeah,
so that we get excited. Yeah.
maybe a better question is how Webflow is structured in terms of teams. Like what is kind of like, okay, you get that idea that goes maybe through like obviously you, the VP of product, and then eventually goes down to, I don't know if you have product owners, product managers, how that works, and how does it eventually get to the teams of developers and designers, or even if you have like separate teams of developers and designers.
Yeah, we have teams split up focusing on different aspects of the product, but it's something that we're looking to, you know, operationalize and optimize. Because especially as the company grows, like it was easy for us to say, hey, you're the CMS team, just work on the CMS, or hey, you're the designer team, just go work on designer things. But what ends up happening is that they're going to be working on things in isolation. And then what's worse is that they're going to be working on things that might not actually be the highest valuable thing, the most valuable thing that customers actually want. So right now we're trying to go through this transformation in terms of our product philosophy to start thinking about how teams can align around the outcomes that we want for our customers. Those outcomes are how do I build the things that I want to build in Webflow? How do I make the businesses that these Webflow sites are built for more successful with their Webflow site? And what is the underlying infrastructure and technology that we need to invest in to enable this work? So that's like a pretty big shift in terms of how we're thinking about the organization of the business, but it's something that we're obviously trying to figure out what's the right
Got it.
sequencing.
How many people use Webflow right now?
I think we're around 180, 185,
Okay.
something like that.
So you went, I'm assuming through a lot of like different growing pains points along that. But yeah, you're getting. I'm assuming like at that size, yeah, you see all of those communication issues, and how do you? Because it's not the like 5-10 people anymore, right? Like it's a lot more. Um,
Yeah, which makes it hard, but it's just the nature of the
yeah.
game.
No, I understand. Another interesting thing that I saw, at least looking at your job postings, is that you have a lot of remote work going on, right? Um, so are you mostly remote, or
Well, yeah, especially with
well, right
COVID,
now,
we're
yeah, but
100%. Even before, we were 70% remote.
cool.
And we're thinking about just going 100% remote because it's working pretty well. Um, and it's something that we're thinking about just making permanent. Um, and yeah, like I think with remote teams, it's difficult to build a lot of the interpersonal relationships with your colleagues to make work less transactional and just more collaborative and fun. So we're trying to figure out ways that we can bring that back and make it better.
But are yeah, that's definitely true. That part is something that every remote team needs to work on. But what other tips would you have for people that are now forced to, or in general that want to build remote teams?
Well, I think it's really important to check in with your teammates before the meeting actually starts and you get to business. Something that I do with the rest of the exec team and then with the teams that I'm leading is we'll kick off our weekly meetings with 3 feeling words. So we'll share like 3 words that describe how we're feeling today, whether it's at work or personally, just to build that human connection. Because something that is very easy to get lost in remote work is that it's easy to just see the person on the other side of the screen as just your coworker and not like an actual human being that's got kids, that's got remote learning, that's got illnesses or whatever it is. So I think that helps build trust and respect with the groups that you're working with.
In terms of the communication, like within Webflow, how do you handle that? Like, do you do a lot of asynchronous communication? Um, is it just chat? Any other form of written communication?
Um, we use email sparingly and only when it's like super official. So a lot of Slack. We do jump on calls when know, it's appropriate to. We try to have pretty clear outcomes for the meetings that we're in. So it's just a part of like overall operational hygiene that I think everyone now needs to think about. Like before, when we would just hop on Zoom or Skype, it was just like, oh yeah, we're just chatting. But with how busy our days are and just how many things are going on, I think it helps teams to be super intentional about how they're structuring their meetings.
And so, would you say that overall people are happy working remotely at Webflow?
I think so. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Cool. That's nice. But yeah, and another thing that I noticed that I don't know, I thought it was interesting. On your job postings, it says remote on the Western Hemisphere, which I thought was at least different. Because a lot of time, like a lot of times, the job postings that you see posted as remote say, then you go and check, and they say US only. Um, and so you mentioned the Western Hemisphere, which I thought was funny because that kind of covers the entire American continent, but also I don't know if you consider it, but also like Portugal and the UK, and kind of
Yeah.
ends there. But
Yeah. So we have full-time employees in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe. And also in some cases, we have employees in APAC and Asia and Middle East as well.
mhm.
So, um, yeah, we're very much a global remote company with a preference for West Coast. Sorry, with a preference for the Americas and
Mhm.
the time zones that are.
Yeah, so that it's mostly because of the time zone, right? So it's got it.
That's right.
Cool. So, Brian, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, and we're also running out of time. I don't want to take it any longer. But do you have anything that you would like to talk about? Anything you'd like to like that you guys are working on? You would like to promote personally?
We have crossed a few pretty big milestones here at Webflow. We crossed 100,000 customers recently. We um, have a lot of really exciting updates to share in the near future, but I can't share them right now. So you can check out our Twitter. You can check out our company website to learn more.
Cool. And that's all at Webflow on Twitter. Or?
Yep, and webflow.com. Yep.
Cool. Again, Brian, thanks so much for taking the time. It was, yeah,
All right. Good chatting,
yeah.
Luis. Bye bye.
Bye. Okay, everyone, that was another edition of Subvisual Live Talks. I hope you liked it. Subscribe to any of these channels below, and to get any further informations, updates, and all that. And in the meantime, I hope you stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week. Goodbye.